In my last video I had a quick play with ChatGPT and then a look at the API. In this video, because Bing isn't quite ready for us all to jump on it yet with AI queries, I thought I'd have a look at whether I could build a Spectrum Next client for ChatGPT. The curl command to call the API looks like this, and would the Next be able to call this? So with the curl, you first of all pass the URL for OpenAI. You tell it it's going to be in JSON format. I'm going to do this for 7-bit, but you don't actually need to at this point. And then you've got a bearer authorization, and then the actual data. So the model is text DaVinci 003, and then the question that I'm asking, what are 5 good things about chicken? Max tokens tells you how many words you want it to return. I asked about HTTP libraries for the Next on the Spectrum Next Facebook group, and Robin Verhagen Guest pointed me in the direction of Remy Sharp's Next HTTP library on GitHub. So with this library, first of all, he describes how you use it. So there's an exe file that you need to download, HTTP, and then you call it with a post. This B is the bank number, as it's described down here in the options. The H parameter is the host address, and the P is the port, and then U is the URL. In this case is using /end, but you can change that to whatever you need. Looking through the examples Remy has provided, it seemed that the library wouldn't be able to directly call the OpenAI API, but Robin had suggested the best way to use Next HTTP was to have your own simple web service for handling calls. Maybe I could create my own web service, which would then call the OpenAI API and pass back results in a simple format. Next, I needed to get some of Remy's examples working. As I was using CSpec, this would only work with 7-bit requests through Next HTTP, and I needed to use base64 encoding in my endpoint. The BASIC would need to use -7 in the command to indicate that base64 was being used. This isn't necessarily an actual Next. Next HTTP uses the Spectrum Next banks to send messages and receive the response. So you download the HTTP file from Remy's GitHub repository, and then I've got an HDF monkey command to push it up to my CSpec image, and then a put batch file, which looks like this, and that calls the HDF monkey and pushes it into my CSpec image, and HTTP selects the HTTP file. So I then run that just by calling put, runs the command, and then going into CSpec and looking at my files, I can see that I've now got the HTTP file in there. So then I looked for a suitable example on the GitHub site for how to call the HTTP. So in this example, CSpec demo bas.txt is calling HTTP, doing a get, is using a bank 5, and then the URL is data.remysharp.com. It's using -7 to indicate that the transfer will be done with 7 bits rather than 8 bits, as CSpec can't handle 8 bits. But if you're using an actual Next, you don't need that. And then he's got -u to specify the URL. So in this case, he's calling /u/2. So the full URL will be data.remysharp.com/2. So then typing that into Next Basic. So then running that, it calls an endpoint on Remy's web server, which sends back this graphic to show that it's worked. So I know that the HTTP where I've put it into my CSpec folder is working, and now I can start playing around with it. So going back to the curl command to call OpenAI, I've now written a small web service in C#, calling it post.eg, and this effectively does the same thing as the code command did. So you can see I'm using application/JSON, authorization, the bearer, and then my key. And then the JSON is model text DaVinci 03 prompt, and then the question that I'm passing into this web service, maximum tokens of 300, and I don't want to echo the question back in the results, so that's why I've got that there. I then encode the JSON string into actual JSON, giving it as content, and then I can call the .NET HTTP client library with posting, passing in the OpenAI URL and then the JSON content. And then that waits for the result to come back and then returns it in this task string to the caller. So in this example, I'm calling an endpoint B64 param, passing in the parameter trees. What this does is it sends back the word trees to show that I've got communications going both ways. So if I run that, it gets the word trees, and then all the rest of it is all the rest of the stuff in the bank. And then I'm putting the codes for TREES 116, 114, and so on. So that made me think that I was on the right track. So next I'd write a simple basic program to call my get endpoint, passing in the parameter trees to find out what colour trees were. So I'm using bank 5 and then retrieving 300 characters, which I then try and print out. So when I try and run this, it hangs for a bit and then it gives a read timeout. This is because the OpenAI API takes about 3 to 4 seconds to return a result. And the HTTP code is, I couldn't figure out a way to increase the timeout on that code, so it's timing out. So what I did was I split the endpoint into 2 endpoints. The first one, request cache, would do the call to the OpenAI, but it would do it using a background task. So that would run in the background for maybe 3 to 4 seconds, and then put the result into a database table. But you could use any other sort of cache like Redis or whatever. And then a second endpoint, which I call the poll, would look in the table. So my table is AI text, and I'm passing in the name again, the same name, and that gets the value out of the table and then returns it base encoded to 64 back to the next basic. So my final next basic code looks like this. First of all, I print out what object do you want to know the colour of, inputs a string, and then $, is the API call URL to run the request. So I pass in my $, and then run the get command, the HTTP get, and then I write out press return after 5 seconds to give it a chance to work, and then call the second endpoint poll with the same value $, and then the second HTTP get calls the poll endpoint and writes the result into bank 20. Then write the result into $, from bank 20, the first 300 characters, and then lines 36 through to 39 just do a bit of tidying up of the result, and then I print the final result. So I can run that and say I want to know what the colour of a squirrel is. Type that in. So the first call has gone off to the request endpoint, and wait 5 seconds and press return. And it comes back and it says most squirrels are brown, grey or black. So I can just try another example. So supposing I want to know what colour a daffodil is. Wait 5 seconds. And it comes back. A daffodil is typically yellow in colour. So that's working. I've got a simple client running from the Next through a Azure endpoint and then calling OpenAI and returning results. So thanks to Remy for his library and to Robin Verhagen Guest for giving some tips on how to use it. Hope this has been interesting.